Hello and welcome to this video on functions and modules in Python. By the end of this video, you will understand how to use functions and modules in Python and will be able to implement the code challenge that I provide at the end of this video. The code challenge asks to add several functionalities to a traffic speed camera. So let's get started. Functions in Python are a way to organize and reuse code. Functions can have some input and do something with that input. Functions can also return some output. To define a function in Python, we use the def keyword followed by the name of the function, an open and a close parenthesis, and a colon. Inside the parentheses, we can specify any input that the function will take, also called arguments. After the colon, the function body comes with one indentation. Here is an example of a simple function that adds two numbers together. In this example, we have defined a function called add, which takes two arguments, a and b. Inside the function, we use the return keyword to return the result of adding a and b together. We then call the function by passing in the values 3 and 4 as arguments, and assign the result to the variable result. Finally, we print out the value of result and we get the output 7. Functions can be used for many different tasks, from simple math operations like this one to more complex tasks like reading files or connecting to a database, rendering videos, or data processing, to name a few. Here is another example to define and call a function. You notice that in this example, our sayHi function does not return anything. In fact, if you assign this function call to a variable like I did here, hi equals sayHi, you can see that the return value is none. We can rewrite that code to make it more general by passing the name as an argument. Now let's talk about function scope. When you define a variable inside a function, that variable is only available inside that function. This is called a local variable. However, if you define a variable outside of a function that is in the main body of the program, that variable is available anywhere in the program, and it is called a global variable. Here is an example of a local variable. So here, if we want to access the message variable outside of the print message function, let's say by calling print message, we get an error. The scope would be the same if we bring message as a parameter to the function. Now let's look at another example. In this example, we first define a global variable x and set it to 5. Then we define a function show2. Inside the function, we set the value of x to 2. This x is local to the function, so it is only accessible from the show2 method and is not mixed with the x we defined outside of the function. We call the function show2 and it prints 2. Then we access the global x and print it, which is 5. And here is the run. Modules in Python are predefined code, functions, algorithms, and even variables and constants that we can reuse in our code. There are many built-in modules in Python. For example, if we want to get the time, we use the time module. Or to do some math computations, there is a math module. In Python, you can use the import statement to import modules and use the functions and variables defined in that module. Here is an example. In this example, we import the math module and use the pi variable defined in the module to print the value of pi. You can also use the from keyword to import specific functions or variables from a module, like this one. Here is an example from path module to split folders. Modules can also be created and used by the user. You can create your own module by creating a new Python file, and you can use the functions and variables defined in that module in your Python files. Here is an example of how you can create and use a module. First, we create a new Python file, create mymodule.py. Inside that file, we create a function called myfunction that simply prints hello world. Then in another Python file, we import the mymodule and call the myfunction from that module, which result in the output hello world. And here I test my module reuse. Coding challenge. Okay, so far we learned how to write functions and organize functions in modules. Here I want you to write an application for this question. In the previous lecture, we asked to write a program that uses if, elif, and else statement in a for loop. In this challenge, you need to write another program for a traffic speed camera on a highway. A list of car speeds are sent to your program by the camera. For example, the list of 67, 64, 55, 70, and so on. The question is two parts. First, write a module, a separate Python file, with the following functions. Usage of Python built-in functions is encouraged. A function that finds the average speed in a list of speeds, a function that finds the minimum speed in a list of speeds, a function that returns a list of speeds greater than 60. Part 2. In another file, import your module and call those three functions on this list of speeds. I want you to pause the video here, spend 7 to 10 minutes writing your code, and then check out with my solution. Your output should look like this one. First, I created a new file, my module, and inside that I defined three functions: get average, get mean, and get speeds greater than. To get average, I first get the sum of the speeds in the list, then the length of the speed. If there is items in the list, I return the sum of the list divided by the number of the list. Otherwise, I return 0. To get the minimum speed, I simply call the min function from the built-in functions. To get the speeds greater than 60, I define the limit 60 in the parameters. Then in the body of the function, I define a new variable, new list. Then iterate over the speeds. If any of the speeds is greater than limit, I append it to the new list. And finally return the new list. In the other file, I import my module. I define the list of the speeds. Then I call getAverage from my module. Call it average. Then I call getMin function and return the value in min speed. And finally call getSpeedsGreaterThan function and return the values in our speeds list. We covered defining and calling functions, function scopes, and modules. Remember that functions are a great way to organize and reuse code, and modules are a great way to share codes across multiple files. Now you are ready to take on even more advanced topics in Python. In the next video, we'll be diving into data structures including list, set, tuple, and dictionary. This gives you the tools to solve many coding challenges and to create more powerful programs. So stay tuned for learning and moving upwards.